For more than 70 years, the United States government has quietly stored a strange metal fragment in a temperature-controlled vault somewhere beneath the Nevada desert. Only 5 people in American history have ever seen it up close. Its surface emits a faint vibration, almost like a heartbeat. It isn't from a plane or a missile or any man-made machine. Scientists say it shouldn't even exist on Earth. Yet the government insists it was found, not in space, not underground, but lying on an empty stretch of rural highway in Arizona on a night when every radio in America crackled with the same unexplained sound, a 3-second pulse that seemed to come from the sky itself. No one has been able to explain what happened that night, but every person who investigated it, from ranchers and truck drivers to FBI officers and military engineers, described the same thing. Something was hovering above the road, something silent, something watching us. This is the story of that night, one of the strangest unsolved events in American history, still considered so mysterious that modern researchers call it the silent sky signal. The story begins in 1952 on a warm July evening in a small Arizona town called Dry Creek. Dry Creek was not the sort of place anyone expected history to happen. There were only 600 residents, 1 diner, 1 gas station, and miles of open desert stretching endlessly in every direction. Even the sky felt bigger here, a huge dome of stars that locals often said looked closer than the roof over your house. On July 19th, just after 9 p.m., a man named Arthur Hensley was driving home from his job at the copper mine. Arthur was reliable, quiet, and not the type to make up wild stories. He had a wife, 2 kids, and a Ford pickup that always rattled when it reached 40 miles an hour. He was humming to the radio when he first heard the sound, a sharp, metallic chirp unlike anything he'd ever heard. It cut through the music like someone slicing a wire. Then the radio went dead. Arthur slapped the dashboard, thinking the old thing had finally died for good. But then the headlights dimmed too, and the engine began to sputter, and the entire truck lurched like something was pulling it backward. Arthur pressed the brake instinctively. The truck stopped, but not because Arthur made it stop. It was as if the truck had frozen in place. The desert around him was silent. Even the insects had gone quiet. Arthur opened the door. A warm wind rushed past him, sweeping dust across the road. And then he saw it. A soft white glow in the sky, not bright enough to be a plane, not steady enough to be a star. It pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. Arthur squinted. For a moment, he thought it might be the moon filtered through clouds, but the sky was perfectly clear. The light grew larger and lower. Arthur tried to move, but his legs refused to respond. His hands shook uncontrollably. The light hovered directly above the road, completely silent, and Arthur felt a pressure in his chest, as if the air around him had thickened. He couldn't breathe properly. And then, in a moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life, the light shifted shape. It stretched, bent, folded, and became something that didn't look like light at all, something metallic, smooth and seamless, like a silver drop of water suspended in midair. Arthur's mouth fell open. The object had no wing.
Sheriff Tate didn't sleep that night. By 3 a.m., his small office in Dry Creek looked like the command center of a military base. Radios buzzed, phones rang, and his deputies rushed in and out with new reports. Something unusual had swept across Arizona, and it wasn't stopping. Tate poured himself another cup of black coffee and stared at the map on the wall. Pins were clustered along a 60-mile stretch of Highway 17, right where Arthur had been frozen in place by the hovering object. Every report, every sighting, every malfunction, it all pointed to that same narrow band of desert. Just before dawn, as the sky turned pale blue, Tate heard the rumble of engines outside. 2 black sedans rolled up, followed by a military jeep. 4 men stepped out, wearing dark suits despite the desert heat. They walked into the office without knocking, flashing badges so quickly Tate barely had time to read the lettering: United States Federal Investigation Bureau. The tallest of the group, Agent Harold Mason, shook Tate's hand with an expression that suggested he didn't care who Tate was. "Sheriff," Mason said in a tone as dry as the desert outside, "we'll be taking over from here." Tate bristled. "This is my town, my people." "And this," Mason replied, "is no longer a local matter." Before Tate could protest, another agent spread documents across the desk, forms authorizing federal jurisdiction signed by officials far above Tate's authority. He had no choice but to step back, but he didn't leave the office. He wanted answers too. The agents spoke quietly among themselves until finally Mason said, "Get him." A deputy brought Arthur Hensley in through the back door, still shaken, still pale, still gripping the metal fragment inside his pocket like it might vanish if he let go. Mason sat him down. "Mr. Hensley, we need you to describe the object again, every detail." Arthur repeated everything he'd told Tate, but the agents seemed less interested in his words and more interested in his reactions. They watched his pupils, his breathing, even the twitch in his fingers whenever he thought about the warm, metallic fragment he'd picked off the road. Finally, Mason said, "Show us what's in your pocket." Arthur hesitated. The fragment felt alive, and giving it away felt wrong, like he was surrendering something that didn't belong to humans at all. But he placed it on the table. The room went silent. It didn't look like much, about the size of a coin, smooth, silver, seamless. But it vibrated faintly, almost like it was humming at a frequency too low for human ears. Agent Mason stepped back. Another agent, Dr. Ellen Rhodes, scientific advisor to the Air Technical Intelligence Center, leaned in with wonder. "This," she whispered, "is not aluminum, not titanium, not any alloy I've seen." She touched it gently with the end of a pencil. The fragment didn't move. Instead, the pencil tip flattened slightly, like it had pressed against something denser than metal. Arthur swallowed. "Is it dangerous?" Dr. Rhodes didn't answer. Mason slid the fragment into a small lead-lined case and snapped it shut. "This evidence is now federal property." Arthur stood. "I need that back. You don't understand what—" Mason raised a hand. "You touched an unknown object of unknown origin found at the site of a regional electromagnetic disturbance. For your safety, Mr. Hensley, you'll remain in dry—"
The humming from the metallic pod grew stronger as soldiers formed a tight circle around it, their rifles trembling in their hands. No one dared fire. The pod didn't act like a threat, yet its presence pushed into the air like pressure before a storm. Even the insects avoided the area, skittering away in waves across the sand. Arthur felt that vibration deep inside his ribs, a soft, pulsing warmth that didn't frighten him anymore. It felt almost familiar, like the feeling of standing next to a generator humming behind a wall, but somehow alive. Dr. Rhodes glanced at Arthur again. She noticed how he stood rooted, how the air seemed to respond to him, almost bending. "He's attuned to it," she muttered under her breath. "It recognizes him." Agent Mason didn't like that. He never liked anything he couldn't classify, categorize, or control. "Nobody touches that thing," Mason growled. "Nobody goes near it. We secure it, transport it, and get it out of here." But the soldiers hesitated. The pod didn't appear hostile, but it radiated something indescribable, an energy that felt as if the ground beneath it was subtly rearranging itself. One of the younger soldiers whispered, "Sir, I think it's moving." Mason squinted. Not moving like an animal, moving like something turning its attention. The pod shifted angle by just a fraction, but the fine desert dust slid off its surface as though gravity around it had briefly changed direction.
Arthur suddenly gasped. The vibration inside the locked case surged. The metal fragment rattled upward as though trying to escape. The lead-lined case began to glow faintly, dim at first, then brighter, pulsing with the same rhythm as the pod. Mason stepped back. Someone shut that thing down. Rhodes shook her head sharply. You don't shut down something that isn't built with human technology. You observe. You don't provoke. I didn't ask for a science lesson, Mason snapped, but there was fear in his voice now. The pod pulsed again. Hum. The ground shivered, not violently, but strangely, like a drumhead being struck by a soft hand. For a moment, everyone heard the vibration not through their ears, but through their bones. A soldier fell to one knee, dropping his helmet as he clutched his helmet. "It's in my head," he whispered. "I can hear it in my head." Rhodes's eyes widened. "It's not sound, it's communication." Arthur stepped forward, almost. Then, a distant rumble. Not thunder, not jets, something deeper. Everyone turned toward the horizon as one of the 3 radar signatures began to move, fast, approaching Dry Creek. A streak of silver tore through the sky, descending in a controlled arc, completely silent. Dust exploded outward as the object came to a stop 30 yards behind the first pod, hovering 3 feet above the ground before settling gently onto the desert floor. Then another, and another. 3 identical objects now sat in a perfect triangle formation. The soldiers backed away instinctively. Rhodes whispered the only word that made sense. Formation. The second pod pulsed once. The third pulsed in response. The first pulsed afterward. 1, 2, 3, like synchronized heartbeats. The desert wind went still. And then, a voice. Not spoken, not heard through ears, not in English or any human language. A voice inside their minds. Arthur felt it more strongly than anyone. It wasn't words, it was an impression, an emotion, a concept forced gently into his brain. We have returned. Arthur staggered backward, breathing hard. The voice came again, gentle, calm, ancient. We retrieve what was left. We repair. We remember. Rhodes grabbed Arthur's shoulders. "What is it saying? What are you hearing?" Arthur whispered, trembling. "It remembers us." Before anyone could ask what that meant, all 3 pods began to glow brighter, white light growing, intensifying, expanding outward, not explosive, but enveloping. Something was about to happen, something no one in Dry Creek would ever forget. The white light expanded slowly, like a dome being inflated around the 3 pods. Soldiers braced themselves, many raising their rifles by instinct, but the light wasn't hot or harmful. It felt gentle, warm. For some, it felt like standing in front of a fireplace on a cold night. For others, it felt like stepping into sunlight after hours of darkness. But for Arthur, it felt like something else entirely. Like a memory he didn't know he had was being stirred awake. The surface of the first pod rippled like water. A small opening formed, not a door, but a thin slit of white light. Something rose out of it. Not an object, not a weapon, a projection. A figure made of light stood in front of the pod, tall, slender, with no face, no features, just an outline of glowing energy, shaped vaguely like a being who had observed many forms, but belonged to none. The figure floated a few inches above the ground. Soldiers froze in terror. Rhodes shook uncontrollably, but couldn't look away. Mason's breath hitched in his throat. But Arthur felt the presence again, the same warmth, the same vibration, the same strange familiarity.
The figure turned toward him, though it had no eyes. Arthur whispered, "It's looking at me." The figure moved closer, not walking, not gliding, but simply appearing slightly forward each time the air shimmered around it. Dr. Rhodes raised a trembling hand. "Arthur, what is it doing?" Before Arthur could answer, the figure projected a soft pulse of light toward him, not touching him, just passing through his chest. Arthur didn't fall. He didn't feel pain. He felt memory. A memory that wasn't his. A massive desert thousands of years ago. 3 towering silver structures. Humans gathered around them. Early humans, primitive, frightened, awed. And one of the silver beings lowering a hand of light toward them. Gifts, knowledge, symbols in the sand, numbers, stars. Then the image shifted. A meteor. The white light expanded slowly, like a dome being inflated around the 3 pods. Soldiers braced themselves, many raising their rifles by instinct, but the light wasn't hot or harmful. It felt gentle, warm. For some, it felt like standing in front of a fireplace on a cold night. For others, it felt like stepping into sunlight after hours of darkness. But for Arthur, it felt like something else entirely, like a memory he didn't know he had was being stirred awake. The figure of light floated alongside him now, its form fluid, radiating soft warmth. It communicated again, not in words, but in understanding. "You are ready. You must stabilize the seal. Without you, everything falls." Arthur felt fear prick his spine, but also a strange certainty. He understood the gravity of the moment. The shard, the fragment he had picked up on Highway 17, wasn't just an object. It was a tether, a key, and now it resonated with the pods, the figure, and something beyond the sky. Outside, in Dry Creek, the pods glowed brighter than ever. Soldiers and townspeople alike stared, unable to look away, trapped by the radiant spectacle. The red fracture in the sky pulsated like a heartbeat gone wrong. The shadow beyond the fracture pressed, probing, testing the limits of the pod's barrier. Every human instinct screamed that catastrophe was imminent. Arthur felt the presence of the Watchers through the fragment, massive, incomprehensible shapes moving through the red-streaked sky, probing, ancient and calculating. They were not malevolent, at least not in the way humans understood malice, but utterly indifferent. Their scale alone suggested that Earth and its people were barely noticeable to them. Yet, for some reason, the pods, the fragment, and now Arthur were all part of a mechanism to delay. Arthur felt exhaustion wash over him. Sweat ran down his face. The figure of light extended a supportive hand, or perhaps an extension of itself, and for a moment, Arthur felt like he could endure anything. The lattice of energy grew stronger, interweaving across the sky, creating a protective barrier far beyond what the human eye could see. The Watchers seemed to pause, reconsidering, their shadowed forms hesitating at the edge of the fracture. And then, one by one, they began to retreat. The pod's lights dimmed slowly. The lattice remained, stabilizing the fracture just enough to prevent the full arrival of the Watchers. The figure of light guided Arthur downward. The column of white energy gently lowered him back to the desert floor. His knees hit the sand, but he didn't fall. He was steady, calm, exhausted, but victorious. He looked around. The 3 pods now stood silently, their surfaces smooth, serene, and dormant. The red fracture in the sky had collapsed into a faint streak, barely noticeable against the fading blue morning light. The shadowed shapes were gone. For now, Earth was safe. Dr. Rhodes ran to him, tears in her eyes. "Arthur, you did it! You—" Her voice faltered. "I can't believe it! I don't even—"
Mason stepped forward, pale, silent, gripping his hat.
I've never seen anything like it, not in my life."
He swallowed hard.
Somehow you saved this place."
Arthur held the fragment in his hand. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. He understood that it was not just a tool, but a living witness, something